The first transmission arrived on a Tuesday, which was unfortunate because most of Earth's diplomats were either hung over or stuck in traffic. It came not as a polite greeting, nor as an introduction, but as an ultimatum, a demand that humanity surrender or be obliterated by the might of the Gurzon Dominion. The message appeared in every language, on every screen, broadcast directly into the neural networks of those unfortunate enough to have cybernetic implants. It was a masterpiece of intimidation, brimming with arrogance and the weight of 10,000 years of conquest. The voice that spoke was deep, guttural, and utterly humorless. We are the Gurzon. You are the humans. You are weak. You will submit or you will perish. The transmission then displayed an enormous, hulking figure, standing nearly 8 feet tall, draped in obsidian battle armor that gleamed under the cold, artificial light of an alien warship. His eyes were slits of molten gold, his jaw lined with serrated teeth meant for tearing through flesh. This was Overlord Zyrax, a name that, according to the Galactic Archives, had been synonymous with war, conquest, and ruthless efficiency for over 300 years. The response from Earth, however, was neither fear nor panic. It was confusion. Wait, what? President Alexander Hayes muttered, rubbing his temples as he replayed the message in the secure war room beneath the White House. His chief of staff, Caroline Miller, sighed and leaned against the polished conference table. Around them, military officials and intelligence officers exchanged uneasy glances. "You'd think they'd at least buy us dinner first," General Conrad Williams quipped, arms crossed over his chest. He was an old war dog, the kind of man who had seen enough battlefields to know when an enemy was truly dangerous. "A formal declaration of war on first contact," Secretary of State Miguel Ramirez mused, shaking his head. "That's got to be a record." "They seem confident," said Admiral Catherine Dwyer, her fingers drumming against the table. "And considering the fact that their fleet is currently positioned just outside our solar system, they have every reason to be." A holographic projection flickered to life in the center of the room, displaying a fleet of massive warships, each bristling with enough firepower to reduce Earth to an uninhabitable wasteland. The Gurzon did not play games. They had no need for diplomacy, no patience for negotiations. "All right," Hayes said, exhaling through his nose. "What do we know about these guys?" The head of the Intelligence Division, Director Elias Carter, swiped at the hologram, shifting the display to a dossier compiled from intercepted transmissions and old galactic records. The Gurzon are an imperialistic war species. They conquer, assimilate, and destroy anything they deem unworthy. They operate under a strict warrior code, believing that only the strongest deserve to rule. From what we can tell, they don't negotiate, ever. "So, basically, they're intergalactic Klingon with a god complex," someone muttered. Carter ignored the comment. "They've never lost a war, never retreated, and their technology is light years ahead of ours." "Great," Hayes sighed, rubbing his temples. "And their reason for attacking us is?" "Mostly because we exist," Ramirez replied dryly, "and because they don't think we can fight back." For a moment, silence settled over the room. Then General Williams chuckled. "Boy, are they in for a surprise." Dwyer arched an eyebrow. "General." "Oh, come on," Williams said, gesturing broadly. "These aliens have been fighting in space for thousands of years. You think they've ever seen a human war? A real war? Not this high-tech, clean, no-mess orbital bombardment nonsense. I mean real war. Blood, mud, fire, suffering war." Hayes leaned back in his chair, considering the idea. "You think we can use that to our advantage?" Williams grinned, the kind of grin that made younger officers nervous. "Mr. President, our species specializes in war. We have been perfecting the art of destruction since we figured out how to sharpen a rock. And we didn't just fight wars, we got creative with them." Miller, who had been quiet until now, sat up. "So what are you suggesting?" What show them our history?" "Exactly," Williams said. "We don't send a fleet. We don't launch counterattacks. We educate them. Show them what happens when humans get pushed. Show them what we've done to ourselves, let alone our enemies." Dwyer smirked. You think the strongest war species in the galaxy will be afraid of history? That depends, Williams said. Do they know what a nuclear bomb does to a city? Have they seen trench warfare? Have they ever heard of the Mongols? Napoleon? World War II. A ripple of unease moved through the room. They might have never encountered a species so willing to burn its own civilization to the ground just to win a fight, Carter admitted. Hayes tapped a finger against the table, his mind racing. The idea was ridiculous. Insane even. But there was logic in it. The Gurzon had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of war, but they had rules. They fought with honor, with discipline, with a warrior's pride. Humans? Humans fought dirty. Humans fought with desperation, with ingenuity, with a sheer, reckless disregard for survival that made them the most unpredictable species in the galaxy. Let's do it, Hayes finally said, a slow grin spreading across his face. Let's show them what happens when humans go to war. And so, the transmission was sent. The message was simple, direct. A challenge in response to a challenge. Before you declare war on humanity, we invite you to witness the history of human warfare. If, after that, you still wish to fight, we will oblige. But we do not fight for honor. We fight to win. The Gurzon accepted. They thought it would be an amusing study, a demonstration of inferior tactics and primitive weaponry. They believed it would confirm their supremacy. They had no idea what they were about to see. The Gurzon arrived expecting entertainment. They believed they were about to witness the blundering mistakes of a primitive species fumbling its way through warfare. Overlord Xyrax himself, along with his most elite strategists, entered the colossal hollow theater aboard their flagship, confident that whatever the humans had prepared would only reinforce their superiority. Humans, after all, were young, barely a blip in the grand history of the cosmos. The Gurzon had fought wars before Earth had even discovered the wheel. They had crushed entire civilizations beneath their boots, reduced planets to ash, and fought battles that lasted centuries. There was no human war that could possibly impress them. That belief did not last long. The room darkened, and the first images flickered into view. It began in black and white, the grainy footage showing men standing knee-deep in mud, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow. The trenches of World War I stretched endlessly, a scar across the earth. A deep voice, the narrator, resonated through the room. The war to end all wars. For years. 70 million soldiers. Millions dead. This was just the beginning. The Gurzon observed, at first with mild curiosity. They watched the men in heavy coats and helmets climb from their trenches, only to be torn apart by machine gun fire. Xyrax's second-in-command, General Vulcan, frowned as he leaned forward, watching how these humans willingly ran toward their deaths. Gas clouds rolled over the battlefield. The narrator explained chemical warfare, weapons designed not to kill outright, but to choke, blind, and burn. Xyrax's expression darkened. He was accustomed to war. But this was different. The Gurzon fought for conquest, for dominance, for honor. This was mechanical slaughter. Still, they were not impressed. This war was brutal. Yes, but the weapons were primitive. Then the images shifted. It would not be the last war. 20 years later, mankind would surpass its previous horrors. World War II began. The screen erupted in fire and metal, and suddenly the war was everywhere. Blitzkrieg. Gurzon generals recoiled as footage displayed entire cities crushed under relentless bombing campaigns. London burned. Stalingrad crumbled. Civilians, unarmed, powerless, ran through the streets as fire consumed everything around them. Concentration camps. The screen showed skeletal figures, barely alive, stumbling through fields of the dead. Genocide. Xyrax's clawed fingers tightened into a fist. The Gurzon waged war, but this was extermination, cold and calculated. The narrator's voice remained steady, almost emotionless. They did not simply fight their enemies. They destroyed them. Entire cities. Entire cultures. Over 70 million dead. Xyrax noticed the shifting in his ranks. His warriors had been trained from birth to withstand horrors, to fight without hesitation. But they had never seen war like this. This was not honorable combat between warriors. This was not a clash of great armies on the battlefield. This was systematic destruction. And then came Hiroshima. The footage showed the Enola Gay releasing its payload. The screen went white. Silence. Then hellfire. A mushroom cloud rose into the sky, a spectacle of death, so absolute that even the hardened Gurzon warriors sat frozen. Mankind unlocked the power of the atom. One bomb, one city. In an instant, 100,000 souls turned to ash. A single warhead, and an entire civilization could vanish. The hollow theater trembled under the sheer gravity of what they had just witnessed. The Gurzon had weapons of mass destruction, but never had they seen such a deliberate use of one. They fought for dominance. This was something else. This was annihilation for efficiency's sake. A younger Gurzon officer muttered something under his breath, his voice cracking. Zyrax said nothing, his golden eyes fixed on the screen as the images continued. But humans did not stop there. War evolved, and so did they. The Cold War. The screen flickered with footage of nuclear tests, the Earth splitting apart as megaton explosions ripped through the atmosphere. A silent, unseen war stretched over decades, where the world sat on the brink of self-destruction, and yet they did not fire. A standoff of mutually assured destruction. The Gurzon whispered among themselves. This was insanity. Humanity had mastered war to such an extent that they no longer needed to fight it. Their mere ability to threaten destruction was enough to maintain control. Then the footage jumped forward. Vietnam. Napalm engulfing jungles. Men screaming as fire consumed them. The Gurzon flinched as they saw the first recordings of guerrilla warfare, enemies who could not be seen, who struck from the shadows, who did not fight by the rules. Victory was no longer determined by strength alone. Deception. Subterfuge. Psychological warfare. The art of breaking the enemy without firing a single shot. A single image lingered on the screen. A prisoner in a chair, a single lamp overhead. His face bruised, his spirit shattered. Interrogation. Torture. Mind games. The Gurzon had never considered war as a battlefield of the mind. Then the Gulf War. Stealth bombers that struck before the enemy even knew they were there. Guided missiles that could erase a building from miles away. Soldiers who never saw their enemies. Only screens displaying distant destruction. Zyrax clenched his jaw. Humans no longer needed to see their enemy. They could kill without ever stepping onto the battlefield. The footage cut to modern war. Drones. Precision strikes. Artificial intelligence guiding missiles to their targets with mathematical efficiency. A room full of officers in clean uniforms sipping coffee, watching a live feed of a city being bombed like it was a video game. And then the last image. A lone soldier standing in a desert, his rifle slung over his shoulder, looking out at the burning ruins of a city. His face was impassive, his expression unreadable. This is what war became. A science. A machine. A weaponized understanding of destruction itself. The screen flickered. Silence. Zyrax slowly turned to his officers. Not a single one of them spoke. Some were pale, their claws flexing involuntarily. Some had stopped breathing altogether. General Volkan, the second most feared warrior in the Gurzon Dominion, swallowed visibly and finally broke the silence. They did this to their own kind. No one answered, because they already knew the answer. Zyrax's heart pounded in his chest. He had led countless wars. He had seen entire species wiped out. He had commanded millions of soldiers. But never had he witnessed a species so utterly dedicated to destruction. A terrifying realization dawned upon him. The humans did not fight wars for power. They fought them because it was in their nature. And if they had turned this upon themselves, what would they do to an enemy? Zyrax had faced annihilation before. He had led planetary invasions, shattered fleets, and crushed species who dared to resist the Gurzon Dominion. But this was something else. This was not war. This was something darker, something beyond his understanding. The hollow theater remained deathly silent. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the ambient hum of the warship's engines felt muted, as if the universe itself had recoiled in horror. The Gurzon, a species built on strength and honor, had just witnessed something they could not comprehend. A warrior leaned forward, his breathing uneven. "They fight without limits," he whispered, "without restraint. Even when there is nothing left to gain, they continue." General Volkan swallowed, rubbing his armored hand across his scaled forehead. His voice, usually a confident growl, wavered. "They do not stop. They do not hesitate." Zyrax's gaze remained fixed on the darkened screen. "Because to them, war is not a necessity," he muttered. "It is a craft." The room remained motionless, the weight of the words suffocating. The Gurzon had always fought for conquest, for expansion, for the glory of battle itself. But these humans, these creatures, they fought for something else entirely. They fought because they could. The holoscreen flickered back to life. A human appeared, a historian, dressed in a simple suit, standing before a massive backlit world map. His expression was neutral, but his eyes carried an unsettling confidence. "Now that we have covered humanity's history of warfare," the historian began, his voice calm and deliberate, "let us examine how we fight." Zyrax stiffened. The war history alone had been horrific. What more could they possibly have to show? The map shifted, zooming into specific battles across the centuries. The narrator continued, "War is not just fought with weapons. It is fought with ideas, with deception, with psychology. This is how humans win." The Gurzon straightened, listening. "Consider the Trojan horse," the narrator said, as the screen displayed a crude wooden structure rolling toward an ancient city. An entire army smuggled within a gift, offered under the guise of surrender. The enemy celebrated, bringing it inside their walls. That night, as they slept, their city burned. One of the Gurzon war tacticians hissed under his breath. They infiltrated a fortress, hidden inside a statue. They outthought their enemy, the narrator confirmed. And it would not be the last time. The screen jumped forward in time. The D-Day invasion unfolded before them, the largest amphibious assault in human history. The Gurzon watched the sheer scale of the battle, hundreds of thousands of men storming a fortified coastline. They made their enemies believe the attack would happen elsewhere, the narrator explained. They staged fake armies, sent false intelligence, deployed double agents. The real attack landed where they least expected it. Zyrax's fingers tightened against his armrest. His warriors had always fought head-on, meeting their enemy in honorable combat. The idea of waging war through lies, illusions, and deceit unnerved him. But the lesson was far from over. Humans do not just win through force, the narrator continued. They win before the battle even begins. The next scene showed the Manhattan Project. Scientists in lab coats, chalkboards covered in impossible equations, and in the background, a detonation so vast it turned day into night. They built a weapon that could erase an entire city, the narrator said, his tone cold. And they built it in secret. A nervous murmur rippled through the Gurzon ranks. Even the mightiest empires in the galaxy could not develop such weapons in complete secrecy. They required vast resources, expansive testing. But these humans had designed an extinction-level weapon in silence, unveiling it only when it was too late for their enemies to react. One of the younger Gurzon warriors shifted uncomfortably. They used it only twice, and yet they made sure it was never used again. Zyrax exhaled slowly. A single weapon, 2 cities, and it had ended a war. The historian on the screen clasped his hands together. "But war is not only fought with weapons," he said. "It is fought with fear." The display changed, shifting to a new type of warfare, the Cold War. 2 empires stood on the brink of destruction for decades, the narrator said. Neither fired a shot. Why? Because they understood that the cost of war would be mutual extinction. The Gurzon officers frowned as they watched the footage, nuclear drills, propaganda campaigns, the sheer psychological manipulation that kept an entire planet under constant fear of annihilation. Humans convinced themselves they were at war for 50 years, the narrator said. They made their enemies believe it, too. Vulcan turned to Zyrax, his voice hushed. They fought a war without ever fighting it. Yes, Zyrax murmured. And they still won. The footage shifted again. Vietnam. The Gulf War. The rise of modern warfare. The Gurzon had seen brutality, but now they were witnessing precision. Humans no longer needed to see their enemies, the narrator explained. They could eliminate them from the other side of the world. Drones hovered over distant landscapes. Airstrikes obliterated entire compounds. Satellite-guided missiles sought out targets with surgical accuracy. The Gurzon watched in stunned silence as battles were waged by soldiers who never even set foot on the battlefield. And then, the final revelation. A new image appeared, a man sitting in a darkened room, a controller in his hands. "Is this a soldier?" the narrator asked. The Gurzon hesitated. "No," the narrator answered. "This is a civilian. And yet, he is playing a simulation of war so precise, so detailed, that it can train real soldiers in combat." The image flickered, replaced by footage of soldiers training through video games. Artificial battlefields, virtual reality drills, combat practiced in digital perfection before ever seeing real bloodshed. They prepare for war before it even begins. Silence. The Gurzon warriors shifted uneasily, their spines rigid. Zyrax inhaled slowly. His mind was racing. His warriors, his empire, had built itself upon strength, upon battle, upon the belief that war was physical. But these humans? They did not just fight with weapons. They fought with illusion, with deception, with ideas that could destroy an enemy before they even knew they were at war. And for the first time in his long blood-soaked existence, Zyrax felt something unfamiliar, something alien creeping into his bones. Doubt. The historian on the screen smiled faintly. "War is not our goal," he said. "Survival is. And we will use every tool at our disposal to ensure it." The screen went black. The room was still. Zyrax's warriors looked at him, waiting. Some of them were pale, their faces contorted in expressions that Zyrax had never seen before. Fear. He turned toward the war strategists, those who had planned invasions that spanned across galaxies. Their hands were clenched, their eyes wide. Even they understood what had just happened. This was not a history lesson. This was a warning. Zyrax rose to his feet, his movements slow, deliberate. He knew the truth now. He knew why the humans had shown them this. They had not threatened the Gurzon. They had simply allowed them to imagine what would happen if they tried. And Zyrax, for the first time in his life, was afraid of what he saw. Zyrax sat motionless in his command chair, staring into the void beyond the reinforced glass of his warship's bridge. His mind, once sharpened like a blade, now felt dull and heavy. The echoes of what he had just witnessed clung to his thoughts like a parasite, refusing to let go. The air within the chamber had thickened, his warriors shifting uneasily in their seats, their usual rigid discipline faltering. No one spoke. No one dared. The humans had not responded with fire or steel. They had responded with something far worse, knowledge. A single war history lesson, and the strongest species in the galaxy had been brought to its knees. Zyrax turned his gaze toward his war council. General Vulcan, the battle-hardened tactician who had crushed fleets without hesitation, now looked as though his soul had been extracted from his body. His hands trembled at his sides, his claws clicking involuntarily against the polished surface of the strategy table. "We cannot fight them," Vulcan murmured, breaking the silence. Zyrax inhaled sharply. The admission tasted bitter, but there was no arguing with the truth. The Gurzon had conquered species who fought with valor, who met them blade to blade, fleet to fleet, power against power. But humanity, they had weaponized survival itself. They had refined destruction into an art form. Zyrax exhaled, his massive frame rising and falling with controlled restraint. "We underestimated them. We miscalculated," Vulcan corrected. His voice edged with something dangerously close to panic. "This is not a species that fights for honor. They fight without rules, without boundaries. They fight in ways we have never even considered. Zyrax's golden eyes flickered as he recalled the final moments of the hollow reel, the calm voice of the historian as he detailed psychological warfare, deception tactics, precision airstrikes, drone assassinations. The Trojan horse, the Cold War, the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, all designed to win before the first shot was fired. This war would not end in a battlefield victory, Vulcan continued, his voice hushed. It would not be determined by strength or numbers. If we attack, we will never know peace again. Zyrax nodded slowly, the weight of that truth pressing into him like a vice. If they struck Earth, humanity would not respond with mere retaliation. They would bury the Gurzon from the inside out. They would turn their own people against them, infiltrate their systems, corrupt their very way of thinking until the Gurzon Empire tore itself apart without a single human ever setting foot on their homeworld. This was not a war they could win. He turned toward his officers, each of them shifting uncomfortably under his gaze. Some still clung to their warrior pride, their jaws clenched, their fists curled into defiance. But even they felt the fear now. The battle, the real battle, had already been fought, and they had already lost. Zyrax straightened, his expression grim. "We leave." The words were final. They fell upon the chamber like a death sentence, as if an entire empire had just been swallowed whole. No one questioned it. No one argued, because they all knew. They had come to make an example of humanity. Instead, humanity had made an example of them. Vulcan let out a slow breath, his throat tightening. How do we explain this to the council? Zyrax turned his gaze back toward the stars. We tell them the truth. A stillness settled over the war room as the implications of that statement took hold. The Gurzon had never retreated from battle, never abandoned a conquest. This was unprecedented. The moment they turned their fleet around, the council would demand to know why. They would not understand. But the Gurzon who had been here today, the ones who had seen what humanity was capable of, they understood perfectly. And then, as if to confirm their worst fears, a new message arrived. A single line of text, transmitted across subspace, visible to every single officer aboard the warship. Are you sure you want to do this? No threats. No posturing. No formal demand for surrender. Just a question. Zyrax felt the blood in his veins turn to ice. He turned to the communications officer, his voice low. Did they? They sent it, the officer confirmed. Directly to our warship. No known relay. No intercepted frequency. Just straight to us. Zyrax clenched his jaw. The humans were already inside their systems. Vulcan exhaled sharply. We need to leave. Now. The order was given. Within minutes, the entire Gurzon fleet pivoted, abandoning its original formation, moving away from the Sol system as quickly as their engines would allow. It was not a retreat in the tactical sense. It was an exodus. And yet, as they fled, the feeling of being watched did not disappear. They had not just left behind a war they could not win. They had left behind a species they could never afford to fight. Hours passed before the tension in the war room began to ease, but it never fully dissipated. Even as the stars stretched before them, even as the threat of immediate destruction faded, the Gurzon could not shake the presence of humanity from their thoughts. Zyrax sat alone in his quarters, staring at the holographic projections still hovering before him. The battle records, the strategic breakdowns, the cold statistics of human conflict. They all pointed to the same, terrifying conclusion. They had never faced a species like this before. He leaned forward, tapping a command into his console. A direct transmission to the Gurzon High Council. Classification, urgent. Status. Terminate all hostilities with humanity immediately. Recommendation, do not engage. He hesitated for only a moment before adding the final words. For the survival of the Empire. The message was sent. And with that, Zyrax did something he had never done before. He prayed. Not to any gods. Not to any celestial forces. But to the stars themselves, that he would never again see the wrath of humanity unleashed.